like I said, for my days at the high school, it's all they see is what their neighborhood is, and when and if they get out of high school, they feel that I'm trapped in this neighborhood, and that's the answer. We got to get that. We got to get that out. Show them more. Show them what life has to offer. And I think a lot of mentoring programs we don't have anymore because everybody is so busy, doing what they do to be successful in life. And I think we got to get back to that. And just in talking to the young man who comes to our office, very, very, just very into himself, not really open, and I have a 5-year-old. He talks more than this high school senior. But is it a part of being at home where he's raising brothers and sisters, and we've gotten to a point where our rapport is better, but just listen to the doctor, listen to Philip. I mean, I'm understanding now. I've grown just within the 30 minutes I sit here on how these kids are taking things and how they are systematically processing all these emotions in their mind.
What is the Sheriff's Department trying to do policy-wise to push some of these mentoring programs?
Well, so the sheriff is very passionate about, he doesn't want to just have his role be court orders them into my custody and I'm just going to, house them until they're out of my custody. He's very passionate about trying to do something to help these people. And we spoke a little bit about mental health. He's definitely taken we have a lot of initiatives going on with mental health. He's hired a doctor to come on his staff full time who there a lot of the people that come in have acute mental health issues and stuff. But we have social workers that are working round the clock, 24 hours a day. We have a hotline. So if you have somebody who's on electronic monitoring and says, I can't get my, anxiety medication, I can't get my, whatever medication, how we have somebody that answers the call, helps them to get it. So, we do try to do a lot of, as far as mental health. But above and beyond mental health, the sheriff tries a lot to bring in programs into the jail to try and teach a skill, but also kind of like what Marlon was saying, just to expose inmates to, the joys of working with their hands. We have gardening programs, we have cooking programs, we have guitar lessons, we have a barbershop scholarship program, just to try to teach some exposure and just to get more fulfillment so that when they leave that, they can leave at least a little bit better off than when they came in, and try to, give them something to look forward to.
I just want to ask Noni one thing before we open it up. So Phyllis, certainly you mentioned about kids in foster care and sort of the damages of that system as well. And you're speaking of trying to give them serviceable skills before they get out. But we know that often when people are released from incarceration or when people age out of the system,
Yes.
at 18,
Yes.
they have not only don't have the maturity level, but also don't have any kind of skills, coping mechanisms, and are released back into the populations that were most dangerous for them.
Exactly.
Is that part of what we see in community, and what is happening in community to sort of ameliorate that? Are there programs around restorative justice or anything that helps with reintegrating people back into society in a meaningful way?
I think these types of programs are needed. Unfortunately, I can't speak to the amount of work that's being done. I know that there's some grassroots organizations out there trying to do this sort of work. The level of mental health care that's needed and I think of more of the juvenile detention centers. The level of mental health care that's needed is tremendous.
Well, and you can just think of the schools. You don't even have to
Just
think about the
schools,
juvenile justice system.
just the schools,
Yeah.
but these folks are being released back into the general population, and I had some stats on the number of folks that 75 to 93% of youth entering the juvenile justice system have some degree of trauma. And there have been follow-up studies. There's Linda Teplin at Northwestern University has followed folks who've been released from the Juvenile Detention Center and found that years later, they're still experiencing mental health issues because there was no emphasis on treatment before they went in, while they were there, or when they came out. And so they're often re-traumatized within that system. And so you're not only releasing people who don't have the skills, but they have these mental health issues on top of that. And then there's this issue when you speak about the foster care system. There's a new area out now that discusses polyvictimization, meaning we can't just think that kids are exposed to one sort of type of victimization, that kids who are exposed to community violence sometimes are also the victims of abuse. And, so, and that really taps into kids in the child welfare system as well. So there's a huge need for it. And I know that there's some grassroots organizations doing work around that. I don't know how much policy work is actually being conducted.
But you know, the thing I see, because I work in a lot of schools, I speak in a lot of public schools in my community and in Chicago, and I have been in the office and see little kids come up to the principal or the secretary and said, I came to get my medicine. We're talking about children that's on Ritalin, Prozac, different antidepressants. And I'm talking about 4th and 5th graders. So if we got children that are in 4th and 5th and 6th grades that's on medication now, psychotropic drugs, what do you think is going to happen when they get older? We got a problem already, but we're going to have a bigger problem, ladies and gentlemen, as these kids get older. What are we going to do with these children who are going to be dependent on substances to make it through the
Interesting thing about that too. That's a great point. And I worked at a disruptive behavior disorders clinic at UIC for a while. And so we had kids who were referred for showing attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. And these kids were being treated for what seemed to be ADHD. And at some point we realized that these kids, most of them were showing the effects of trauma. Trauma shows up in young people as irritability, as difficulty concentrating, as in difficulty staying on task. And so these kids were being referred for ADHD when the issue was really trauma.
Yes.
And we know that that kind of treatment, that referral to, or that over-medication and seeing students as being troubled in that way or being disciplinary problems disproportionately affects young men and young men of color in school.
Yes,
in
it
school
does.
environments.
Yes, it does.
Questions, comments from the audience? Yes.
walking the streets, talking and being in different communities. In the communities that you're talking about, that's exactly what you see. But when you have store owners, again, I like to emphasize this, is that people who work in our community don't hire us. They hire their own. They hire their family. So if our community is full of Koreans and Indian and Arabs or whatever, which is exactly what is going on, they don't hire us. So our young boys don't get a job. Our young women don't get a job. And in our community, what we're also seeing is that if you don't know how to speak Spanish, you're not going to get a job. So there's discrimination in our community that is causing these problems. It's not that our young black boys don't want a job, they can't get one.
But I think that, yes, and I think that there are, I think that there are systemic issues
Yes.
that make it more possible from somebody who is not of the community to be able to open a store
That's true.
in the community than it does for somebody to come in. And the preparation and the training that it takes to be entrepreneurial in that way, those programs also don't exist. But I'm curious about this question. We can find in Chicago enough money to provide a tremendous tax break for DePaul University to build a new multi-million-dollar
Ain't that something?
facility that's not even going to really be utilized by the community anyway. If you look at Hyde Park and how the University of Chicago has taken over all
the whole
of
Cottage
53rd
Grove.
Street and all of that area, even though
Yes.
that money then is not really being generated and going back into community, we seem to be able to find money
Yeah.
and resources for those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But the communities that are deeply, deeply impacted by this and could just use a community center, we can't find that money. And I honestly, nobody up here really is in a position of work to really speak to that, but I'd be curious to
But-
hear what you think about
But Willie, when there's a gentrification coming to your community, there's money to move these people out of the community, to build houses, to make bike paths. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And it's sad because when people, because I've lived in it. I've seen people, the new developers come into our community. They call it gentrification.
Gentrification.
And they come and build these buildings knowing that nobody in the community can afford them.
Right.
So what happens is the people start moving out and they move into areas where they can afford it. And then the next thing you know, that is no longer a black community. It's a Caucasian community. And they're able to walk their dogs, they're able to ride their bikes, but the houses that we used to live in are no longer ours. And what they do is they give African American women and men that are poor these subsidies and put them in communities where everybody is subsidized. So what do you have then? Poverty again. You bring in more poverty to a poverty community. What can you get out of it?
But what can we do? What systems are in place? What can we demand from Cook County? What can we say to Tony Preckwinkle? What can we say to Tom Dart around this issue?
Well, for one, I think the system condones a lot of things. And when I say condones, I've talked to people we've arrested, and why you're not trying to get a job? Well, why should I go get a minimum wage job when I'm living on Section 8 and where I'm getting a link card for $1,200, $1,300 a month? So that makes you sit at home. That makes you sit at home where, like I said, there are no dreams. Why go to work? Why put myself out there and I'm living, paying $20 as part of my Section 8, and I'm getting food every day? And this is a fact. This is nothing that can be made up. And they're proud of it. They are proud of it. You can go into the stores in my neighborhood and around the first of the month, somebody's walking around with a link card. Hey, I got a link card. I got 500 on it.
And they selling it.
And they selling it. They selling it.
But these issues are very, very complicated and very complex. So that is certainly the narrative that people on the right will use about safety nets, that there are people who are sort of taking advantage of the system. And in any system, there are people who take advantage of the system. But to her question, why can't we, what do we need to do to hold our elected officials accountable to make sure that resources that actually we pay for out of our taxes are going to solve these kinds of problems and not just subsidize the new stadium for a very expensive already university?
My short
And,
answer
and,
to
and this is a question to everybody, not just the four of them up here on the panel.
I don't know. I've been in protest marches, I have sit-ins, I have spoke at City Hall, I've been with Father Flager. I have done everything that I could think of.
Well, where are the people that run against
Well,
the mayor to change the system?
well, okay, that's another issue.
That's a whole nother
That's
panel.
That's a whole different panel. So let me first say that oftentimes when I'm asked to do these panels, people want to know, what's the one thing we can do to make this right? There is no one thing we can do to make this right. It's very complicated. There's so many things that need to happen to turn this around, that just isolating one thing is not going to work. But speaking to this issue of elected officials, we now have more millionaires in Congress than ever before. So whose interests are they representing? And I think it's very interesting when we talk about handouts that they weren't complaining when the banks were getting handouts from the government. How is that different? I don't understand. I know that's a separate panel, but I just want to note that there are, folks complaining about handouts were also getting handouts and weren't complaining about their handouts.
Well, that's subsidy, which is different from handout.
As they would explain it.
Right. Other questions? Yes.
I think part of the problem is we still haven't talked about gun violence in Chicago. And I think really part of the problem is we have a very difficult time about talking about the problem. We've talked about economic development, job training, mental health issues, but we still haven't. I came to talk or to listen to a town hall about gun violence in Chicago. Is the panel suggesting that gun violence will end if there's economic development? Or it will end if there's better health care treatment? So
Well, I think
Those are the risk factors. These, I feel, I have discussed the risk factors that cause the problems that we have, that cause youth violence in the community. And what I really want to depict to you all is that it's not just a gun. It's a whole generation of things that has happened to a people in different communities that affected them, that caused the violence. If you are a black child that lives in a community and the only way for you to get to the other side of town, because you got to go through another group of about 5 different gangs to get to school, then your mind every day when you get up is thinking about how I'm going to get there safely and what I'm going to do about it. We have fourth graders who wants to bring a knife to school because they want to get there. It's to protect themselves. And another thing about young African American boys and any young boys, they don't want to be no punk. Straight head. I want to talk to y'all straight about this. Because these young boys, they're not going to walk, knowing already they got to get to 63rd Street to get to class. Because our kids' schools are not like walking a block. They got to walk 8 blocks.
And I think one of the things that this play, Gospel of Loving Kindness, really exemplifies is that gun violence is a symptom. It is not the root cause. Yeah. That the young man who shoots Tosin's character, and part of, let me just say, you got to see the play because it's so beautifully realized. The issue is that he is looking for a job. He can't get a job. He can't even get a job at Walmart. He is now a young father. He needs to make money, and the gang is offering him $500 a day as opposed to the $750 an hour or whatever it is that he would make at Walmart. And that becomes an issue and the exacerbation of the violence. Yes. Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Sorry. So, okay, let me just, since I need to repeat the question, let me stop you there so I can repeat it. So first of all, you are responding to something that this gentleman said. So this gentleman asked the question. He made the statement that he had come here to talk about gun violence, and we had not really talked about that. And he was offering a supposition that, or he asked the question of us, the panelists, if we were saying that economic development was part of the reason why there, or lack of economic development was part of the reason why there is violence, yes? And so your response is that there are a lot of people who are doing a lot of work, represented by law enforcement policy, mental health issues, and grassroots work up here. Why are there not task forces designed with this kind of composition to target individual communities? And that the only thing that's not represented up here are jobs, and we understand that getting jobs is very difficult because no one is qualified to get the jobs that there are happening, correct? Okay, so okay, so the question then is, why is this not happening? Okay, but those things do exist. First of all, those things do exist in almost every community. There are lots of them. There's a plan that Mayor Emanuel put together that is raising $50 million called Get in Chicago, I think it is, that is a private-public partnership to raise money specifically around job training and skills building and after-school programs and that kind of thing. So that stuff does exist. And those things have constantly existed, and still we have this issue that we're faced with now. So I would say that there seems to be something more than just about sort of these task force in communities. And I don't know, yes?
Willa, to address her topic, I think this panel here kind of shows you where we can take this. Myself being a police, I've never, listening to Dr. Tony, I learned a lot about why kids are showing these violent tendencies, why they're doing that. I think we have to get that message out to police in dealing with these kids, because that's what we deal with. I think we have to get that message out to the educators who are in the schools. I think we need to get more people who are licensed like the doctor to talk to these teachers so they know he's just not a bad kid, he's just not acting up. There's a reason for it. Then you have to have the grassroots person like Phyllis, where she's experienced it. She knows what it looks like. She knows what it smells like. And then with Carrie here, we have to come up with policy. So this is the picture right here. Not us, but just the different roles that can be taken and used to come up with a better game plan. But like I said, I've sat here and police, lock them up, let's move on. That's not the answer. That is not the answer to the question.
But you closed 53 schools in the city of Chicago, and you then, when you lay off additional teachers, one of the first groups of those teachers are the counselors who would do some of that sort of counseling work. And then you close all but, what, 5 mental health clinics in the city because of budget considerations, and yet you can still fund that stadium at DePaul. So that, to me, seems to indicate a larger issue than just all of us getting together to talk about what we can do. I can feel the aura. You need to speak.
I'm just saying I'm overwhelmed because it's such a big. There's a song called "Living Like We're Bulletproof." I don't know if anybody's ever heard that song. And I love that song because they talk about multiple influences on violence and why young people are being violent, starting from individual level, going all the way up to the societal level. And all of these, I love your plan, I do. I think, we have to have people around the table all talking about these, but about us moving from dialogue to action. That's it. You guys had that at the end of your description of this town hall, dialogue to action. And we have to move from dialogue to action. One issue, I think, is that everybody has their own ideas about why this is happening. And we have really great people working on these issues, but they're working on that one thing they think is causing the problem, instead of people kind of coming together. I think about what happened in Harlem with the Harlem Zone. And that was an incredible movement. Jeffrey Cannon. Canada, I'm sorry. And his work in Harlem. And what was interesting to me is that people all of a sudden thought, I was actually working with a researcher who said, we need one of those in Chicago. And I'm like, we do? Because two things happened for him. He has a billionaire backing him up. Let's be clear about that.
Several.
Yeah, well, now several. But he had an initial donor, billionaire, who was backing him up, throwing all the money in the world at him to do this work, who believed in this work. The second thing is, Jeffrey Canada knew Harlem, right? He understood Harlem. And it's one thing to have people come in, I'm very honest, I grew up in the South as well. I grew up in a town with 11,000 people. The only gunshots I heard were during deer hunting season. I can't walk in a community like Inglewood and say, all right, I'm an expert on violence, and let me tell you what you need to do. Everybody shuts down. There has to be some participation from the community. I'm not an expert on violence. I've learned some things, and there are things I still need to learn about it. And what's interesting to me is when I work with young people around coping, I have colleagues, we need to write these coping manuals. I'm like, really? Because they were coping before we got there. And how do I know how to tell them how to cope? They're doing things already that have gotten them to this point. Maybe there's some things that could be done differently, we don't know. But when you come in as an expert saying this needs to happen, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to change. Because they're narratives, and narratives have to be linked to data. They have to. We can't just assume that we can come in and say this intervention. We need to talk to. We don't know what's already happening in some of these communities. And I'm talking. You were talking about the experts coming in, and I'm addressing the problem with the experts because I work with a lot of these experts that are going in,
And they know the problem.
and they don't really understand what's happening in the community.
Is everybody familiar with sort of the Harlem Zone? Does that, so Jeffrey Canada is this guy who actually started a school in Harlem in essentially this sort of very narrowed geographic area in Harlem. And part of what his understanding was, which I think is essentially what certainly the two of you are talking about and what we're talking about, is that no issue sort of exists in a vacuum. So
Right.
It's not just about violence. If kids are failing in school, it's because they are traumatized because somebody has been killed, because somebody has, a parent is missing from the home. They don't have enough food to eat in the morning. They are struggling because they gotta walk through gangs. And so he understood that wraparound services,
Yeah,
so
holistic
mental health
wraparound.
services, food, nutrition,
Prenatal care for
prenatal
mothers, prenatal
care,
classes
job
for mothers.
training
I mean,
for the
he
parents.
addressed
Went all across
everything
all of that
you could
needed to be
possibly
wrapped
address.
into service of getting kids better grades in school. That it wasn't just a simple issue.
Right.
And kind of to touch on both, when you were saying that, people that everyone's working on this, but everyone's kind of has a one-track mind of like, I know what the problem is,
Right.
and I'm gonna fix it. I think sort of the larger problem is there is no one answer.
No, it's not.
And so when people, don't work together, or, I sometimes find it frustrating when you read a lot of studies and things like that. You want to get to the end and you want to read the conclusion, like, all right, here's what.
Tell me what to do.
Yeah,
Here's 5 things.
what do we do from here? And it's not that simple. It never is. Yeah, and so
I mean, there are
feel
things,
like
yeah,
it's
and there are
a-
things that we can address, and there are things that we can't. We're privatizing prisons. Do you know what that means? It means people make money off of having bodies in prison.
Businesses.
They need
Right,
merchandise.
that's right.
Businesses.
So we need. For some folks, stopping the violence means they lose money.
Exactly. Thank you for saying
You
that.
know, so
Because
it's
I
a
wanted
huge
to say
issue.
that. Sometimes I wanted to say that.
And let me just say, we could talk all day, but let me just get more questions from the
Okay.
audience.
Thank you for saying
Because we seem to, that's another panel. So
Yeah.
we need to come back, Che, Isaac, we need to continue this conversation.
Won't
Other questions, other comments from the audience? Yes. So there was Peace on Earth Film Festival down at the Cultural Center where there were films showing all weekend, Friday through Sunday, around these issues of gun violence, the systemic roots of it, what's happening with that, yes? And wraparound services and the needs for those kinds of things as well. So back to this point around sort of wraparound services and what that meant. So
I have a grief support group and wellness. And we
this
meet,
is moms.
This is Moms, Mothers
Right.
of Murdered Sons. We meet once a month at the Bellwood Library, and we talk about everything. And the first thing that we do talk about is first identifying how you're feeling. Have you accept the fact, because a lot of these mothers are in denial that their children are even deceased. I have mothers who come in I have a mother right now, it's been 2 years, and she has not changed her daughter's room. Everything that was in there is still the same way. And when she comes to the meetings, she talks as though her daughter is coming back. So when you talk about this trauma, the loss of a child is something you don't even want to feel. Not when they have had someone else put 2 bullets in their heads. When these mothers come to my support group, it's a place of refuge. It's a place where they can cry, they can cuss, they can scream and holler, they can say, God, why you do me like this? But when it's all over and said and done, we leave out of there, and there's no telltale sign that we are mothers grieving. We walk out there just like normal people. We have jobs. We got to take care of other children. Some of the mothers are taking care of their parents in their homes. So we don't get a chance to grieve. We just go back to the norm, and people always saying, you know, you a superwoman. No, because at night, the anguish and the pain of knowing that you saw your baby in a casket and you had to put him in the ground and you're never going to see him because somebody took his life.